Okay, this is now part 2 of my Horror Nights history for the year 2000's event Halloween Horror Nights 10, which of course was called Not Afraid of the Dark. You don't know Jack! Yes, and so we continue with part 2, and I was talking about the whole evil clown thing. So, and of course after that, there was an iconic evil clown that had become a part of our horror movie fan consciousness, horror films, horror of horror fans, because Stephen King wrote this incredible horror story back in, I think, the early 80s called It, about this like ultimate evil being that would, came from somewhere in outer space, perhaps a Lovecraftian type of entity that was so incredibly evil, but it would appear to us in forms that would horrify, everything from like hideous vampires or ghastly wolfman type creatures, the Frankenstein monster. All these sort of things would appear when he would terrorize the children in the story. But the appearance that he most commonly took was an evil clown called Pennywise, a truly twisted and demented psychotic evil figure. And of course that clown was brilliantly portrayed in a made-for-television adaptation by the great Tim Curry, famous also for playing the Lord of Darkness, and also for playing Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So we have he was one of the main, I would think. Pennywise was probably one of the greatest inspirations for Jack, since he was such a prominent evil clown figure. But I also, again, talking about archetypes, even before Gwynplaine and the Man Who Laughs, the sinister figure of the clown appears throughout our culture in everything from tarot cards, where the fool, who is a clown, is also sometimes called in French le mat, which means the killer, strangely enough. And also from carnival traditions of a clown who would become king and would rule over the carnival, but that figure was always quite sinister in some respects, as well as the whole idea of carnival, because carnival is this time of excess and this time of total abandonment, when all the rules of morality are thrown off just before you go into the more austere holy season of Lent. And so you let all your sins go completely wild and eat and drink and screw around and do all sorts of naughty sins of the flesh and all the things that get out of your system before you start repenting at all and start fasting and praying during the Lenten season. And so the clown, in a way, was a symbol of all of that decadence and debauchery and evil that you're supposed to bring forth and then dump. And then the King of Carnival, of course, in the ancient pagan stuff that went on before it was adapted by the Catholic Church, that guy could often actually be a real person who would be sacrificed at the end of the season. And of course this was done symbolically by having King of Carnival die at the end of the carnival season. So this stuff was actually always there in the whole back of our culture and back in our group mind archetype, that kind of stuff. This figure has existed for centuries, long before the stories and movies and comic book characters like the Joker. So when a serial killer puts on clown makeup, maybe he tapped into that somehow, tapped into that evil, that, well, not necessarily evil, but this notion of some sort of uncontrollable chaos. And that's a very important thing. Long before this year and the idea of chaos with Jack, it's always been there, because this is a symbol of chaos, an out-of-control clown. Think about clowns too for a while. Think about what they look like. The hair's all over the place, they're wearing clothes that don't fit or they're baggy, and the nose is bright red, and they got this weird loopy grin. A clown is a caricature of a person out of control, because that's also a description of someone who's drunk out of their mind. Think about a drunk, their face, their nose will turn red, and they'll slur their speech, and they'll be messed up, and their clothes, and all of that. And it is actually a caricature of an out-of-control, dangerous, violent, drunken madman, but turned into a figure of comedy. So, in a way, that's also a part of it. The idea of losing control, giving up all of the civilized veneer that we try to keep and try to pretend that we're not actually some kind of, well, basically mammals. Because you and me are nothing but mammals. like they do on the Discovery Channel, and oddly enough, that comes up later. That very song comes up as part of Halloween Horror Nights 2000, Halloween Horror Night 10 as well. That song was played that year in a very interesting portion of the event, and so that's kind of interesting because it does tap into that. Yes, Dr. Jimmy likes to overanalyze everything and get all the nuances out of it, doesn't he? But that's, if I didn't, I wouldn't be Dr. Jimmy. I'd just be some guy. So, well, it was an awesome event that year. It was really, but no, I have to overanalyze it because, you know, I'm like that guy at the beginning of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I'm just not as well dressed. But that's who I am. You know that. So, okay. So, Jack the Clown. Now, Roddy really liked this idea, and he was pushing it, and I think he may have tried to get this character in earlier, but 2000 seemed to be the year that he was getting greenlit, but they still wanted to check it out. And so what they actually did was they had the character, had him made up, had him all set up, and they tested him on certain days. I don't know when this happened. I don't know if it was in the spring or in the summer, but on certain days in the park, Jack would show up during regular business hours, long before the event started, to terrorize guests, and there'd be like a sign saying, "This is, you know, this is to test a possible character for Halloween Horror Nights 10. If you don't want to be, if you don't want to have your shit scared off, well, I think it was socks scared off of you, but whatever, shit scared out of you is what I think, of course. But if you don't want to be scared and wet yourself and cry to your mommy, then don't go in here. But you did go in that area, then Jack would come out and would terrorize, you know, random tourists and guests who were attending Universal that day, and they would gauge the reactions and have them write down if he was scary or was he not scary, and thus they were able to get enough evidence, I guess, to support that this is a good character to use. And they taped that, and you can actually find the video if you go dig into the website for the year 2005 and look it up. You can find that video and see that little Jack test. Now, a disclaimer. Although I attended every Halloween Horror Nights from 1991, the ability to recall and remember every detail of every house and everything gets a little fuzzy, especially, you know, in some of the years where I may have only gone through the houses once or twice or 2 or 3 times, you know, because although I attend the event as often as I can now, back then I was lucky to go, in the year 2000, lucky maybe to have gone maybe 3 times max the entire event. I was probably at least 3 times, maybe more, but probably no more than around 3 times. So trying to remember every freaking detail of every house and everything in that year, and any other year, especially the previous years, I have to rely on information resources that can help spark the memories and remind me of things. And if there was something I really didn't see or do as much as another thing, I could, oh yeah, that's happened that year too. And it helps me to do these presentations. Unfortunately, some of that material is no longer available to me. A lot of it was on the vault, and although over HHN Rumors they had archived a lot of this information, recently, for some odd reason, Universal asked them to remove that information from the vault for a while. Maybe there was something in that information from Rumors. Perhaps there was something there that they don't want anyone to see during the event now. I don't know. Maybe it has to do with Bloody Mary and the whole Wiener to copyright Farrago. I don't know. But I don't have that available, so I have to rely on other places and sources. And I've been doing the best I can. I think I've got it nailed. And as I get, of course, as I'm moving forward in time, I'm coming to years where I can remember more clearly everything that I did and saw. But oddly enough, there are still houses in very recent years, such as 2004, for example, where I went several times, much more than these ones, and went through every house many, many times. But there's certain houses in 2004 that I have almost no memory of whatsoever. And it's like, that's strange, but memory's a weird thing. So what can you say? I'm doing the best I can. Anyway, so I have a disclaimer about that, but nevertheless, I'm doing the best I can. And let's see, where was I? I got off the track. I mentioned Roddy, yeah, so they got Jack. So they got that approval in And so this is going to be the guy for the event. And what they decided to do with Jack was to have him everywhere. Not only would he be the central character, but he would be, I mean, it would be, I don't think any other icon since has so pervaded an event as Jack did in the year 2000. It was awesome. And of course, they started to tease the public with Jack. I mean, after that little thing in the park, they put the billboards, and the billboards, of course, had that little Jack in the Box. And it started with that, and then over a course of a number of weeks, I think beginning probably in August and working towards September, getting closer and closer to the event, they would add a little bit to it, maybe a couple of new words underneath, and then suddenly the thing pops open, and then it's Jack closer to the time for the event. Just absolutely fantastic. But before the guy popped out of the billboard, I saw a picture of what Jack would look like in the Sentinel again, in the audition ad for people wanting to be characters. So once again, it got leaked in this way because it was right there in the paper, and you could say, oh, that's what the clown's going to look like. Now, by this time, they did have something on the internet, and by 2000, I started going on the internet, but it was really nothing more than just one big page with the clown, once the clown had been announced, had been seen, and some information, what dates it's going to be. There might have been a place where you could click on a video, but I don't think so. I mean, the only video that would have been available would have been the advertisement. There was a great advertisement for the event with involving a picture booth, which is interesting. You would go. It shows these two people at Halloween Horror Nights. They're going to a picture booth to get their pictures taken. To my knowledge, I don't think there ever was such a picture booth at Universal, but Jack shows up while they're taking the pictures and terrorizes the young couple. Intriguingly enough, that picture booth is at the event this year, and you get your picture taken with Jack at that picture booth, as I have. Those of you who see me on Facebook have probably seen that picture, I hope. But otherwise, you know, that was taken a couple weeks ago with me and Jack. And interesting enough, it's the same guy playing Jack who posed with me in that picture this year, who was the first Jack way back in 2000. That is once again Jimmy Keaton. So that was cool too. Now, so Jack was brought in, and you can go back and watch my other video about Jack the Clown and the icon videos I did earlier, where I talk about how I first actually met Jack when he was presented at the Fangoria Weekend of Horrors, which was held in that awful little hotel, a little Days Inn located, I think it's a Days Inn, located right off of I-4, which is directly underneath the billboard. If you're standing in the parking lot of you're looking right up at the freaking billboard, and there's the billboard for Halloween Horror Nights. In fact, it's the same this year. The big, HHN X billboard with the teeth of fear is right there, looming over that little Days Inn, and that's been. But that was the only time I think they ever had the Fangoria Weekend of Horrors convention in Orlando. And I went to that, and again, I told you the story how I met Jack, and Jack was Jimmy Keaton, who had recently worked at Adventures Club, so he still knew who I was and called me by name and freaked me out until Andy, who also worked at the club, big portly actor, he used to always play Graves, told me who it was, and thus I was, oh, that's who it is. It's not like somehow supernatural that they know who I am, because I was not famous Dr. Jimmy back then. No, I was just some guy who worked at Disney. Doing what Jimmy used to do at Disney before he went to Universal and became an evil clown. Alright, so that year the event once again was 19 nights, the same number it had been the previous year, all within the month of October. And when this event began, we had once again 5 lovely houses. 5. So we'll begin talking about the houses now, finally, at the very end of the second video. The first house is called Anxiety in 3D. Now, this was the second house to be presented in 3D, like the previous Universal's Creature Features in 3D from the year before. Once again, the 3D effect was created with what would ultimately be called Clownovision, the most recent time this had been done, back in 2006, by having the props and scenery and costumes of the characters be in the brightest colors, mainly red and green and orange. Out of time again. Be back to this in part 3. See ya.